This latest chapter of One Piece was huge. Luffy and Kaido were still in the midst of their clash against one another, and Luffy happened to be applying the Haki teachings that had been bestowed onto him by way of Old Man Hyogoro, while Kaido had enveloped himself in his flames in such a way that a much larger fiery visage of his dragon form would appear for the sake of harming Luffy. Kaido here would commend Luffy's efforts, that for him to have come this far was truly impressive. However, he quickly declared that Luffy would never be able to change the world. And once he said this, we would receive one of the biggest red flags a character in the midst of a fight can receive, a flashback. Here we would have Kaido, who is an absolute menace to society at the young age of only 10 years old, demolishing whole buildings and leaving them engulfed in flames. Now, mind you, at this particular point in time, Kaido would not have a devil fruit, as Big Mom was actually the one to provide it to him, and they had not met just yet. Kaido was a terrifyingly powerful figure worthy of infamy even at only 10 years old, which, although a tad bit older at this particular point, reminds me of Big Mom's early travesties. The country of Kaido's birth would then be revealed as 46 years ago, Kaido lived in the Rashwan Kingdom, a location which happens to reside in the South Blue. As a child of only 10 years old, Kaido is referred to as a soldier, and the strongest one at that. Now, this was the case because the Rashwan Kingdom had been forced to wage war. And interestingly enough, this war was triggered by a need to pay the celestial tribute. And so for the sake of paying their taxes to the world government, the kingdom was willing to do what they needed to do. Now, as a reminder, the celestial tribute, or heavenly tribute, is required of a country for it to be allied with the world government, what ultimately allows them to be protected from the likes of, say, pirate occupation. Although perhaps not as cruelly, it is a nefarious means of extorting a whole nation under the guise of protection, similar to that of, say, the former occupation of Dressrosa by the Don Quixote pirates. Behavior that certainly makes sense considering Doflamingo's celestial birth. But anyways, being the rough young man that he was, Kaido would wonder why the celestial dragons got to boss the king around, but the king did not care what Kaido thought, as he knew the way of the world. Now, Kaido hailing from this particular kingdom is especially fascinating to me. On the more minor side of things, Kaido's obsession with drinking and getting drunk may be tied to his country of birth, as the name of his ruler was literally King Beer. But taking things a step further, Rashwan Kingdom, like how Wano is heavily based on Japan, seems to very much be based on Russia. This is information we presume to be the case even before we had ever seen the location itself, but is now even further corroborated by the presentation of massive mountain ranges behind the kingdom, which Russia is very much known for. So with all this in mind, Kaido by extension is essentially a Russian man. And looking beyond these simple stereotypes of being exceedingly strong and tough, it is with this knowledge that we are able to more accurately pinpoint what may have been an inspiration of Oda's in his construction of this arc. As a world builder, one of the best things you can do to make your own world and its history more feasible and or authentic would be to study the events of the real world and its history. And it seems Oda has done just that to an extent, with Kaido's impact on Wano being relatively similar to the real-world Russo-Japanese War. In the early 1900s, Russia as a European power felt unbeatable as opposed to the much smaller Asian country of Japan. Their forces outnumbered that of the Japanese tremendously, just like with the Beast Pirates against the Wano resistance. Yet despite these seemingly insurmountable odds, Japan won the war and completely and utterly shocked the world that presumed the outcome of the conflict to be the other way around since its inception. This war also saw one of the largest pre-World War land battles in history, which doesn't perfectly align with the world of One Piece, as of course Marineford is a thing, but if we assume the World War equivalent to be the final war of the series, then the comparison can make a bit more sense. Ultimately, Kaido would be sacrificed for the sake of the country. Being as powerful of a soldier as he was to be offered up for Navy enlistment. Frankly, the country could not handle someone as strong as him, and Kaido is very much against being a servant of the world government. And this just adds to the list of very powerful characters that could have very well ended up being Marine soldiers. The deal was that if Kaido were to be handed over to the Marines, then the kingdom would be guaranteed a seat at the next reverie. But again, being used as a political bargaining chip certainly wasn't something Kaido was comfortable with. From there, it wouldn't be long before Kaido set fire to the Navy vessel and escaped. We would then receive Kaido's very first bounty, which was set at an impressive 70 million. That's more than Luffy's 30 million, more than Big Mom's 50 million, and more than the big-time rookie Bellamy's 55 million. This is a huge starting bounty. And this was due to the fact that the kid had been captured several times over and kept on escaping. Apparently, he used to let himself get caught on purpose whenever he got hungry, which is just brilliant, and certainly not something a Devil Fruit user could reliably do on account of Sea Prism and such. We would then jump to 2 years later on the pirate island of Hachinosu, the location that these days seems to be dominated by the Blackbeard pirates, but was once, particularly during this flashback, in the possession of the Rock's pirates. At only age 5, Kaido was laying out pirates with ease, doing so with such prowess as to garner the attention of Rocks himself, who would send his crewmate Edward Newgate, or Whitebeard, to recruit the kid. An addition that would have the Rock's pirates be seen as unstoppable. We would then quickly jump to the moment where Charlotte Linlin, who at this age I'm sure plenty of you wouldn't mind calling her Big Mom, would announce to Kaido that they were going to God Valley, which would of course later come to be known as the location of their crew's end. A revelation that would be incredibly difficult for the world to believe, but would cement the legend of Garp the hero. Although without the full story of Roger's inclusion in the event, it would understandably be hard to believe, with infighting being far easier to imagine as their fault since none of their members were exactly team players. I mean, Whitebeard's captain was Rocks, yet he seemed pretty buddy-buddy with Roger, who supposedly took the guy down. And with Kaido taking his leave so abruptly afterwards, Big Mom was of course not so happy about it. We would then have Kaido as the captain of the Beast Pirates 10 years later at the age of 25. And with him was the ever-wicked Higurashi, and it would seem that she spent some of her time away from Wano with the Beast Pirates. Here she would express to the mighty captain that throughout history, humans have always turned to brutality to solve the problems of the world. In the end, humans were animals. And like is the case with all other animals, survival of the fittest is their true nature. A sentiment which Kaido very much agreed with. It was believed that from then on, everything would revolve around the former members of the Rock's crew, which to an extent is actually pretty true, as 3 other members would go on to be the Emperors of the Sea. This evil witch would then express that weapons shape the world they live in, and therefore, she had a proposition for the embodiment of brutality. What we of course know to be his occupation of Wano and his subjugation of its people. Kaido was ready, willing, and able to raise hell by way of warfare. All for the sake of showing these so-called peace-loving nobles that the only way to truly test one's worth was in battle, fully embracing the equality to be found in anarchy. Kaido would at some point bring up to King that Yamato mentioned Joy Boy. He wasn't sure how his kid learned of such a name, but on account of this, he'd furthermore say that Oden wanted to open up Wano to welcome Joy Boy, then telling King that if Joy Boy was the man he was waiting for, then he knows who he is. This would then bring us back to current events. The remaining CP0 agent was in the midst of vacating the premises by way of Geppo, the inclusion of which is pretty major as the world government, and more specifically, the 5 elders' attempt to stop Luffy has failed, and they should now become aware of this fact. Yamato was certain of Luffy's victory here, and as such, one last time, would cry out for Momonosuke to do what he needed to do. The young lord would then yell out for his flame cloud to appear and obey him. The people of Wano had set their lanterns off into the sky along with their hopes and dreams. Meanwhile, from within Onigashima would be a whole lot of screaming and yelling. At first it was unclear where this was all coming from, but with Raizo and Jinbei still doing their best to flood the enclosure, the rippling waves of their efforts would carry many to safety, a number of which were dull for users, therefore causing issues for them. Eventually, plenty of people would be brought together by the water as the flames subsided. Sanji, who was still with the woman he had saved, would now be held onto by her much to his happiness. Meanwhile, Frankie was still holding onto Zoro, who was in need of medical attention. We would then move on to Denjiro and Hiyori as he commended the young woman for her resilience and all the suffering she had endured by her lonesome over the years as the severed head of Orochi continued to burn. And hopefully he will be burning elsewhere as well, considering the many atrocities and sins he has committed. I seriously still believe he got off a little too easy. But the time had come. Onigashima was officially falling. Kaido's flame clouds were gone, and the castle was going to crash. Meanwhile, our heavy hitters were still going at it. Kaido would then ask Luffy a question. What kind of world did he seek to create? As Luffy would strain for a while here. Momonosuke would again cry out for his flame cloud to appear, and much to his surprise, this time around, they would actually appear and begin to surround Onigashima. Now, I'm not sure what I was expecting, but I didn't expect it to just work like that, but I guess it did. Luffy was finally beginning to gain the upper hand in this bout as he'd begun to answer Kaido. His fist would be pushed into the side of Kaido's face in a way that certainly reminded me of his former lackey Doflamingo. Luffy's response would be a world where his friends could eat as much as they like. A very simple concept, but certainly a tall order in a world of such greed. And considering how starved the people of Wano have been, it is a brilliant thing to say to such a ruthless tyrant. This was the sort of world Luffy was willing to fight for, and fight for it he has, as he'd finally defeat Kaido once and for all. Using his fist to plunge Kaido into the depths of the sea in epic fashion. Kaido would then recall the words he had expressed to King in the past, that Joy Boy is a man who would be able to beat him one day. A concept that if true, King believed Joy Boy would never appear. but up here, he certainly has. Onigashima's descent has been successful, and unbeknownst to the people of Wano, after 20 horrible years, their wishes have finally come true as their saviors, Lord Kozuki Momonosuke and Monkey D. Luffy, look to be receiving a much-needed and well-deserved rest. What a ride it has been, but boy am I excited for what is to come next. As always, I am Slice of Otaku. Thank you all so much for watching and have an awesome day. I love you.